story time with any Gina.
The prince convulsed on the marble floor, his hands clutching at his throat, his face ashen as the poison spread through his veins. The banquet hall, once filled with laughter and the clinking of goblets, fell into an eerie silence. The courtiers, frozen in disbelief, stared as their beloved prince writhed in agony. Only one figure stood at the far end of the room. Unblinking, his gaze steady, but filled with a hollow sense of inevitability. Ivor, the royal cook, did not flinch as the life drained from the prince's eyes. He had been waiting for this moment. His heart did not race. It beat with a cold rhythm, as though the very air around him had grown still. As though time itself had paused in acknowledgement of what he had done. It had started innocently enough. Ivor had never intended to kill the prince. He had not come to the royal kitchens with murder in his heart. In fact, he had once admired the prince, Prince Cedric. With his charm, his beauty, and his effortless way of commanding the respect of those around him. But, like so many things in the palace, appearances could be deceiving. Ivor's story began years earlier, long before he set foot in the opulent halls of the royal palace. He had been born to a family of humble means in the distant village of Corling, a small settlement tucked away in the forested hills. His parents, both skilled in the arts of cooking and healing, raised him on a diet of carefully crafted meals made from herbs, spices, and plants they grew themselves. Ivor learned to recognize the subtleties of flavor, to mix ingredients in ways that soothed the body as much as they delighted the senses. When the royal chef passed away under mysterious circumstances, the palace sent word to nearby villages requesting a new cook. Ivor, eager to escape the small world of his village, had made the journey to the capital, bringing with him only a small satchel of herbs and his mother's ancient cookbooks. Upon his arrival, he was taken to the kitchens, a sprawling labyrinth of copper pots, ovens, and stoves that churned out the finest meals in the kingdom. Though he was a newcomer, Ivor's skill with food quickly garnered the attention of the palace staff. His creations became the talk of the court. Dishes crafted with rare ingredients, concoctions that seemed to sing with flavors never before tasted in the kingdom. Soon, even the king himself began to seek out Ivor's meals, praising him for his artistry. But it was Prince Cedric who caught Ivor's eye. As the prince grew older, he became known for more than just his looks and charm. He became a man obsessed with indulgence. His appetite was insatiable, an endless hunger not just for food, but for power, for attention, for adoration. His arrogance bloomed like a dark flower in the heart of the kingdom, and the servants who attended him were treated with cruelty and disdain. Ivor, in his early days at court, had witnessed the prince's outbursts. Cedric would lash out at those who served him when the food was not to his liking. He was a spoiled child, masked in a grown man's body. But there was something in Ivor that snapped when he saw how Cedric mocked his mother's culinary tradition, casting aside dishes as though they were nothing more than trash. It was one night, after a lavish feast for the kingdom's elite, when the prince's cruelty reached its peak. Cedric had demanded the most extravagant meal imaginable: fishes from distant seas, fruits from far-off lands, meat spiced with the rarest of herbs. But when the plate of grilled venison, prepared by Ivor himself, was placed before the prince, he sneered. This is all you can manage, cook. A simple piece of meat. He spat, pushing the plate away. Is this how you think to satisfy a prince? Ivor stood there, his heart heavy with anger. He could feel the sting of humiliation, not just for himself, but for every servant in the room. The prince's words rang in his ears, echoing in his mind as the laughter of the courtiers filled the air. It was the next morning, as he cleaned the kitchens, when the idea began to form. Ivor had learned that a new batch of herbs had been delivered from the farthest reaches of the kingdom. Among them was a plant he had not seen in years, belladonna, or deadly nightshade. It was a rare herb, used in small quantities to numb pain. But in the wrong hands, it could be lethal. The thought flickered in his mind like a candle in the dark. It was not the first time he had considered revenge. Not the first time he had thought of how easy it would be to slip poison into the prince's food. But now, the idea did not seem so foreign. It felt necessary. The prince's cruelty could not go unchecked. For weeks, Ivor bided his time. He continued to craft exquisite meals for the royal family, all the while silently preparing for the moment when the prince would finally push him too far. That moment arrived sooner than expected. The night of the banquet arrived. The palace was alive with music and the laughter of noblemen and women. The long tables were laid out with plates of the finest food, and goblets filled with wines from distant vineyards. Prince Cedric, adorned in his finest robes, smiled graciously at his guests, though his eyes glinted with the same disdain he always showed for the people who served him. Ivor had prepared a dish of roast goose, stuffed with exotic herbs and a sauce made from figs and rare spices. He had carefully dosed it with the belladonna extract, just enough to incapacitate, to send the prince into a state of weakness, and eventually to claim his life. It would be the perfect plan. As Cedric took his first bite, Ivor watched closely. The prince's eyes widened for just a moment, savoring the richness of the sauce. But then, as the meal continued, something began to change. His face grew pale, his hand trembled slightly, and his breath grew shallow. The first signs were subtle, too subtle for anyone to notice, but Ivor knew. Minutes later, as the prince fell to the ground, gasping for air, the hall erupted into chaos. The courtiers screamed for help, but Ivor remained unmoving, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the downfall of the man who had tormented him and so many others. His work was done. The prince, with his insatiable hunger for power, had finally met his match. The royal physician arrived too late, his attempts to save the prince futile. The poison had already taken its toll. As the days passed and the kingdom mourned, rumors spread about the cause of the prince's sudden death. Some whispered of a mysterious illness, others speculated about foul play. But no one would ever suspect the quiet cook in the corner of the royal kitchens. The man who had watched, waited, and finally struck when the time was right. Ivor continued to serve the court, though the weight of his actions hung over him like a shadow. He knew he could never undo what he had done. He had killed a prince not for gain, not for wealth, but for justice, however dark and twisted it had been. The kingdom moved on, as kingdoms do, and the death of Prince Cedric faded into history. But Ivor would remember, always, the taste of his revenge.
Thank you for watching. Please click on the subscribe button now if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet. Love, from Storytime with Auntie Gina.